Welcome to Fancounters. My name's Nick.
And I'm Elizabeth.
And Elizabeth, I love doing research for this show. In fact, today's show, I spent 3.5 hours putting the show together.
I know, you said that, and that's an unusually long amount of time for you to put a show together for
Here's
us.
the problem. Our guest today has done so many things and has been, I just have so many questions. I couldn't even narrow it down. I didn't even talk about all of the projects that she's done that are even, very, very noteworthy because there's so much material. And the problem that I find is now I feel like this guest, Janet Varney, is our guest.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're best friends.
Oh, no.
I've never talked to her before in my life.
Oh, that can't be good.
But I sent Janet the questions, and her rep emailed me back and says, Janet was very impressed with what you've come up with here. And I thought, ooh, this is really good. But
we do get that a lot, though.
Oh, I know. Yeah, we do. But the fact that I know so much about her now, I feel like, we should be hanging out.
Oh, dear. Are you going to become her stalker?
No, not at all. Not at all.
It's called Fancounters. Do I need to keep you at a safe distance?
Maybe today's show is one where you should. I can say because of all the research, I did start watching the show Stand Against Evil.
Yeah.
Which she's currently starring in. It's awesome.
I'm going to pass.
It's like a funny Walking Dead.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that, too.
You're no fun.
No, I just don't want to be scared to death.
Okay, well, you can watch Janet Varney, who you can watch The Legend of Korra because she voiced Korra.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, there you go. So that's where you know Janet from. And also, do you remember way back when TBS used to have the show called Dinner and a Movie?
Yes, I used to watch it.
Did you?
I did.
Well, she hosted that show for 7 years. So
Yes.
you've probably seen her.
Yes.
She's also starred in a plethora of television shows. Her current show is Stand Against Evil. She also starred in You're the Worst, Entourage, an Emmy-nominated series, Burning Love, and she also did a guest spot on one show that I love, American Housewife.
She's also the co-founder and creative director and the producer of one of the largest and most acclaimed comedy festivals in North America, the San Francisco Sketchfest. The San Francisco Comedy Festival, which just celebrated its 17th year.
That is so cool. I have done very little amount of things for 17 years.
Yes. And she also has a podcast, just like us.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the JV Club, which explores the highs and lows of growing up and does the show weekly with a celebrity co-host.
Just like us.
Right.
Like I said, we could be BFFs.
Oh, geez. Okay.
So she does this JV Club podcast, which I started listening to. Man, she's got some really good guests on that show. But have you had an awkward growing up moment?
Not that sticks out of my head.
No? The only thing that sticks out from my growing up years is like the fashion trends. And I always...
Oh, I'd be careful if I were you. Remember, I am 10 years older than you are.
Well, I don't want to talk about your... No. I guess in the 90s we were rolling our jeans.
Oh.
That was a big thing. Did you probably did that because you were in your 20s in the 90s.
I would have been in my 20s. I do know how to roll my jeans. And yes, but I survived the 80s with the large hair and the curling iron that you would curl but not actually comb out. It was a very strange trend.
With lots of hairspray.
Yes, there was an enormous amount of hairspray in my high school years.
All right. Well, I'm pretty excited. So let's just cut all this banter out and go right to the show.
Here's Janet Varney.
Yay.
Coming to you from nowhere near the entertainment capital of the world, this is Fancounters, the podcast.
You're amazing. You need to come to Hollywood. I'm going to make you famous.
There was this mob of people, and they're screaming my name.
Crazy fans.
Stop following me. Don't come around my house. If you do, the cops are going to be at yours.
I think this guy wants to fight me. Ended up being a fan.
There's just like security guards with like M16 holding like fans back.
Are you kidding me?
I continually will get stopped.
Can I take a picture? We're gonna. Oh my God!
I definitely declined signing body parts.
Oh, I don't want to go there.
I'm the only one that's ever spit on Sam Jackson and lived to tell about it.
That's why we call it Fancounters.
I don't think you're going to last on the air very long.
Hello, is this Nick?
Janet Varney, how are you?
Good morning.
Good. How are you?
We're doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
So I thought, why don't we get our listeners more acquainted with the personal side of you? I have 20 rapid fire questions. Let's see. You want to see how you do?
I do. I'm very nervous.
Okay, let's do it.
You'll be great.
Here we go. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
She says it's so sad. All right,
It's a bad thing.
This is rapid fire.
It was the opposite for such a long time. So it was like I felt like I was betraying my younger self.
Okay, I got it. All right, Coke or Pepsi?
Pepsi.
Oh, yuck.
Yuck.
Coffee or tea?
We are Coke people.
I'm shocking everyone early.
Yes. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
High school, was it awesome or terrible?
It was awesome.
Okay. Okay. Beaches or...
I had to merge.
That's okay. Beaches or snow?
Snow.
Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram?
Twitter.
Okay. Are you organized or do you let things just happen?
Organized.
Whoa,
boy, that's a good go.
Ooh, we're coming back.
Depends.
Oh.
Yeah, it depends on if it's work or social. If it's social, I'm terrible at organizing and I'm very lazy and I just let things happen if they even happen at all.
Okay. TV shows or movies?
TV shows.
Oh, okay. Well, my next one is, what was the last movie you watched?
The last movie I watched was Mute on Netflix, which I sort of still feel like was a TV show because everything feels like one long TV show on Netflix now.
Ask for permission or ask for forgiveness?
Ask for permission.
Okay. Wow. Books or magazines?
Books.
Being nice or being fair?
Oh, God. Being... No. You know what? It's rapid fire. My first instinct was to say being nice.
Me too. What's your favorite food?
Oh boy. Probably. This is a terrible thing to say, but anything corn related.
Hey, that sounds delicious.
I don't eat corn on the cob or cream corn. I'm one of the many Americans who is like ruining the planet with my love of like chips, popcorn, like that kind of corn.
We're with you. Okay. No, yeah, right. What kind of car are you driving?
It's an Audi.
Okay. Favorite color?
Like some hue of blue.
Morning person or night person?
I'm a morning person.
Favorite ice cream
weird,
flavor?
Though. That doesn't feel true either. But I'm not a night person, really. I don't know. Favorite ice cream? Chubby Hubby.
What is that?
That's a Ben & Jerry's flavor that had it was like peanut butter ribbons of peanut butter with chocolate covered peanut butter filled pretzels.
Oh, dang.
In like some maybe like I can't remember if it was like a mix of vanilla and chocolate ice cream or something, but yeah, it was a real kitchen sink kind of a flavor.
Two more. Favorite music artist?
Favorite? I'm really bad at picking any favorite.
Oh, that's okay. Well,
let's go Frightened Rabbit today.
Okay. And what is the worst non-acting job that you've had?
The worst, well, I would say probably working at Subway.
Really? You worked at Subway?
All due respect, yeah. All due respect to Subway, but when I was a sophomore in college, I worked at Subway, and I just hated that my roommate and I both worked there, so our entire bedroom just smelled like I wouldn't have minded if our shirts and visors. Sorry. I've never said out loud. I haven't talked about wearing a visor for a while, and just the idea that you're wearing a sun visor inside is really funny to me right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Our shirts and visors smells like sort of that sour onion smell that you can't ever get out. If they smelled like the bread, I would have been fine with that because I ate a lot of like bread and chocolate chip cookies when I worked there. But like the smell of it just never. It didn't matter how many times you washed your green polo shirt, it would just always smell.
My niece worked at Subway too, and she actually has mentioned the same thing. The smell that she takes home with her in her car. She mostly complained about her car smelling like Subway, but so that was really funny you said that.
If I had a car at the time, I probably would. I had them, so. And I did, but even the fresh air didn't do anything to air it out. So there you go.
We're going to go right to an event that you are the co-founder of and just celebrated 17 years of the San Francisco Sketchfest. So now we're a month past, so I'm sure you've had some time to recover from that.
I have.
Can you tell us a little history about the Sketchfest and how you got it off the ground?
Sure. I'm in a sketch group with three of my close friends from SF State, from college. And one of them went off to my friend Gabe Diani, who's still one of my very best friends. He went off to work on a one-man show that he had been developing at the time, which was terrific. And while we were sort of like, having some downtime from the group, had sort of started exploring this idea of where we would want to perform when we could come back together and do a kind of a longer headlining set. And what we had experienced in the year or so that we had been doing comedy together in San Francisco was that while San Francisco has this really rich, wonderful history of comedy and a real appreciation for comedy, for whatever reason at that particular time in the city, there weren't a ton of places to do anything but stand-up. So it was kind of like you had to either, go do stand-up at the sort of like brick wall background, holding a microphone world where there isn't really a backstage to like change, and like not a lot of people fit on a stage, at any given time. So there was that option, but then the other option would be to, rent a theater. But then if you're a sketch troupe or an improv troupe, you're like, well, how are we going to, like, first of all, who's going to come see us enough that we would even be able to afford this space? And two, who wants to do their 45-minute sketch comedy set, 7 days a week or what have you?
Yeah.
And so it really was kind of created out of, the need to have a place to be able to perform. And so we had, in the kind of small circuit of performing sketch that we had experienced up to that point, we had met 5 other really terrific sketch groups that were working in San Francisco at the time. And we reached out to them and said, if you feel like we do, maybe you guys would be interested in going in on the rent for this small kind of 75-seat theater right off Union Square in San Francisco that we had kind of sussed out as a possibility. And if you guys would let us, we could kind of present it as a festival of all of our groups. And then, if we're doing 7 shows total, or whatever it was, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, maybe there were 2 shows on Friday and Saturday.
Sure.
We could all kind of cross-pollinate our audience spaces, and we could co-headline together. So we all would have a chance to perform with each other. And then we could have, I think we had a couple of nights where there were sort of like olios, where it was all 6 of us performing, 10-minute sets or something like that. And so we called it the San Francisco Sketch Comedy Festival, and we were very lucky in that San Francisco Press has, again, always been very excited about like local startups and, the art scene and all that. And so we got the cover of the San Francisco Chronicles, date book, that sort of Sunday pullout that has a whole book of what's going on. And we just ended up getting a lot of attention, and, Robin Williams came to see a couple shows, and we ended up selling out essentially every show. And so we got some hubris in us, I guess, the following year, and thought, well, listen, if San Francisco has shown us that they love coming to see this kind of comedy, then maybe we should take a chance and expand the theater size, and maybe even venture out and see if we can get a couple of quote unquote headliners that we kind of anchor to the festival in a way that would maybe, we were always thinking, well, we have to have something new and different to keep the press interested. And so that second year we were in a 200-seat theater, which is a theater that we still have today. And we were able to, through a personal connection, get Fred Willard, who was working with a sketch group in Los Angeles at the time called Fred Willard's Hollywood Players. Okay. They came up and headlined for a weekend, and then we also were able to convince the 3 guys that founded the Upright Citizens Brigade. Amy was, of course, on Saturday Night Live at the time and couldn't come, but Matt Besser and Ian Roberts and Matt Walsh took a chance on us on our second year and came up and spent the weekend performing, and they came back the following year. And we just kind of kept going it from there. And, it was a real labor of love for many, many, many years. I remember feeling like around year 8, I remember we kind of took a step back as a trio and sort of said, God, this is sort of coming together. This is kind of starting to feel like a thing that we do. And we were able to kind of lift our heads up from, nose to the grindstone enough to sort of have a little bit of perspective. And then it really wasn't until our 10th year, honestly, that I think we thought, people seem to know what we're doing, and they seem to, we'll overhear someone we don't know talking about Sketchfest in a way that we had never heard before, that it started to feel like it had filtered out beyond, a certain level of awareness. And it's, it's sort of been like that for the last few years. But the whole like cliche of something taking 10 years or, 10,000 hours or what have you, that's kind of my first experience where I've done something long enough where you really do see that that's the thing. Like, oh, okay, so now I am one of those people that can tell someone who's starting a small business, just get ready, because it's not necessarily going to be this just fun, lighthearted thing right away, that, it's probably you're really going to have to bear down and work really hard for a while. Be prepared for that before you start to take a step back and, look out at all you have created or whatever.
Well, that's what they always say. It takes many years to be an overnight success. So
that's right.
Exactly. You said in one sentence what I just clunkily said in 15 minutes. Sorry about that, guys.
So we saw some photos on Facebook of this year's festival. And did you coordinate over 1,000 performers at more than 15 venues? How big is your team? Do you do it by yourself, or how many people are helping you do this?
We have a wonderful staff. In the beginning, it really was Cole, David, and I were, picking people up at the airport, dropping people off. We were selling tickets at the box office. We were selling concessions. We were cleaning the bathrooms and restocking the toilet paper. We were cleaning out the backstage. We were picking up beer bottles in the theaters. Like, we were really doing everything. And we had a couple of friends who helped us out, and a couple of people who, were nice enough to help us with publicity and stuff like that. But we didn't have a whole lot of support. We have one of our friends that we went to school with, Michelle Mitchell, has been with us almost since the beginning. And she was just an angel and a lifesaver in so many ways. She would come in and house manage for us and take on some of that stuff. But now we have just a stunning staff. It's still not big. It's not a big staff for what we do, but we have been able to grow it year after year. And we do have a lot of people who have come back year after year, so they kind of know the drill, and they've, helped us so much in developing better systems and having, the kind of perspective and professionalism that they bring from their other realms. And so we've been able to make it a much bigger machine. But even so, it's still, the core group we have is like maybe 20 people. And those people don't work year round. They like a couple of them will come on in November, and then a few more will come on in December. And then, everybody who kind of comes and tears tickets and drives and all that kind of stuff, that's really just like a 2.5-week job. And then, we say our goodbyes and say we hope we'll see them next year.
So tell me some of the highlights of this year's festival.
This year, we did a tribute to Jane Lynch, which was a huge highlight for me. She's definitely a personal hero of mine. She was in conversation with 3 people that I'm also lucky enough to do improv with, John Michael Higgins and Michael Hitchcock and Ian Brennan, and they conducted this just fabulous and funny conversation with Jane. So that was amazing. We had a conversation with Ricky Gervais and Christopher Guest that was so funny and just great, and definitely felt like a benchmark for us, in the sense that we had wanted to have Ricky at the festival for so long. And, there are a lot of people who stay on our list for a really long time, and it takes a while for them to be available or for them to be convinced or what have you. And,
Sure.
And so this was a year that it worked out with Ricky, and we'd had Chris Guest at the festival before, and we're thrilled that, he's friends with him. So he was able to sort of say, you should do this, buddy. So that was great. I mean, those are two of the kind of the big, our Audible came on as a sponsor last year, and they're just wonderful. The sort of comedy world of Audible exists in San Francisco proper. So they bring some great programming to the table. We did this show called Stinker Lets Loose. That was it's an audio book that this best-selling author, Mike Sachs, he wrote this book as if he had dug up a novelization of a 70s movie that never existed. So it was like, it would be as if no one remembered Smokey and the Bandit, but You know how they like novelize movies, especially movies that you're like, why would you want to read a novel version of Smokey and the Bandit? but they do. And so that's the idea. It's like, oh, remember that old movie? Here's that old movie, Sink or Let's Loose, that was made into they novelized.
Okay.
And then we did this sort of live theatrical version of it in the audiobook that is actually available, and I think it comes with the extra of our live show. John Hamm plays this character named Stinker, and it is this sort of like, got to get this thing across the country to this thing and stay away from the law. And we just had this like outrageously great cast at the festival, and the audiobook has a great cast, and a lot of there was a lot of crossover between people who did the original audiobook and the people who were at the festival. And so that was and there was live music. So that was like one of those things where you're like, oh, this is once in a blue moon. Like, this isn't only at Sketchfest kind of a show. And that was really great. And then, I guess I could go on, but those are three kind of highlights that stick out in my mind.
One of the things I didn't know happened at Sketchfest, which now I think next year I'm going to have to attend because this sounds awesome. You do panels there, and you did a speechless panel. Is that something that you've done a lot of with shows?
Yeah, we've done quite a few panels now. I think, pretty early on we had a reunion of most of the Freaks and Geeks cast, and so that was sort of like the panel of the reunion of everyone just kind of like chatting about what it was like to work on the show. But then, there was a year where we kind of had a Mystery Science Theater 3000 panel, because typically we would have Kevin and Bill and Mike come and actually riff a movie, but they didn't have time to do that. So they did this sort of symposium where they kind of did a panel and a presentation. So a panel is always a kind of a nice thing to do if you want to bring people out who don't necessarily have a live show ready to go or don't have time to put something together, but who are fantastic and who, we are like, well, we know people are going to want to hear from these folks. Just let's get them to San Francisco and, keep it easy for them. So that's kind of one way that we would approach having panels, and or be like a writer's panel where it is kind of more specifically a panel, like let's get this panel of Onion writers to talk about writing comedy or satire or what have you. But yeah, so we've been doing them quite a while, but that was a really fun one. That was a really emotional one because there were people who participated in the audience Q&A who were just really happy to have people with cerebral palsy represented on television, and were able to kind of share their feelings and their thoughts with three of the stars of the show. And so that was definitely one of those shows where you're like, oh, I'm so glad we do this festival. Like, this feels important, on some level.
Oh, it is. I'm a speechless geek. I love that show. And of course, I've loved Minnie Driver long before that, but she's just amazing on that show. Cedric Yarborough, he's really awesome too.
Yeah. They're so great.
One event that I really wish that I could have witnessed is one that you call The Bat. It's improv in the dark. And John Ross Bowie, who is also on Speechless, he was a part of that. So for me, who didn't get to witness it, can you tell us about what this improv in the dark's all about?
Sure. And that's actually something that's going to be coming out on Audible as well. That's a show that Cole and I do for Audible that hasn't been released, but we've been recording live episodes in Los Angeles, and then we did that live episode in San Francisco at Sketchfest too. But basically, you come into the theater, Cole and I come out, everything's normal. We've got the stage lit and all of that, and we introduce our guests. But then we turn the lights out and we get a suggestion from the audience, and then we're just doing everything blind. So people are encouraged to close their eyes. We've given in some situations we've given like nighttime masks, like little sleep masks.
Okay.
To people to put over their eyes if they just want to have a sort of audible experience. And so, for us, it's really fun because it's a totally different kind of energy. And the challenge for us is, when you're used to doing improv live on stage with people, so much of the cues that you're taking are physical, eye contact, that kind of stuff. And so we're just sitting in a line. And so the challenge is really, how do I not interrupt someone because I don't know who's going to talk next? How do you transition from scene to scene if you are just doing it with your voice? Like, all of that kind of stuff has been, it's sort of exercising different improv muscles. But yeah, you can hear a version of that episode as soon as Audible cuts it together and releases it. So you won't entirely be missing out.
Ooh, cool. Awesome. And I wondered about that because if you have multiple people on stage and they can't see each other, how do they not step on each other's voice?
I think the answer is we do.
Okay.
But we do, but you sort of work that into the comedy. I think there are times when we even have like spun off and ended up making a bit about the fact that we're stepping on each other. You know, you just sort of have to go with the flow and find a way to make it work.
As you know, we are called Fancounters, and so I was wondering whether or not you had witnessed any like celebrity fan encounters. Like, did you see any people who were so excited to see other people?
The answer unequivocally is yes. I'm trying to think if I can isolate specific examples in my adult brain. Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen people nerd out on each other, and that goes for celebrity to celebrity as well as, you know, fan / ticket holder. What's a good one? Let's see. There have been a couple of things where people met at Sketchfest, where like they've come back because they do a project now together, and it turns out that they met each other at Sketchfest. Like they were fans of each other, they had never met, and they ended up getting to work together, and it was because they met during our festival. And now I cannot think of a single example, but I guarantee there's at least 3.
But you're talking about performers geeking on each other, and then they come back because of each other. Is that right?
Exactly right. But also, like, there's just so much, you know, what we love about doing the festival is that there's a performer lounge that all performers have access to, whether they are, you know, a local San Francisco college group or, you know, a sketch group from Phoenix that, you know, applied to the festival, because we take applications or submissions and we try to squeeze in as many up and comers as we can as well. And then we have these big parties over the weekends where everyone just gets to hang out with everyone else. There isn't like a VIP section. There's no, you know, it's just like, come to this place. It's this private Sketchfest party, but everybody is equal. And so if you're, you know, a 19-year-old from, you know, Tallahassee, and you are standing in front of Fred Armisen, that you can meet him and talk to him and get your picture taken and all that. And so I think that's also been, or we have somebody open for someone. You know, we have this great, you know, duo open for Bob Odenkirk and David Cross, and, you know, they get exposed to this audience and they get to meet their heroes and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of fan counters that happen with all levels of performers as well. And then, you know, so many of the comedians that we have at the festival are so nice and kind and warm, and they'll go out and do kind of, you know, an impromptu meet and greet with fans after the show. I always love doing kids shows because those are some of the most fun little afterwards where you go out and kids are running up to, you know, people who do voices, like Scott Axett does the voice of Big Hero 6, and he did our Groundlings children's show. And, you know, to go out into the lobby afterwards and see all these kids with just these giant eyes, you know, just staring at Scott, do the voice, those are some of my favorite encounters, is seeing those kids. And the kids are, you know, like the version of the kid who like runs up and is like, can I take my picture with you? There's always like one kid of that, and then there's 3 kids who are like hiding behind their mom or dad's leg, just like clinging to the leg as the leg is moving across the room. And then, you know, peeking out, and the mom or dad is like, you know, she just loved your show. She's not going to tell you that. She's very shy, but she wanted me to tell you. You know? Those are like, you know, they just like put such a spring in my step seeing those encounters.
You are no stranger to podcasts. You have your own, the JV Club, which I spent many hours listening to since I found out you were going to be on our show. And this is a show where you look back at your guests' awkward years growing up. But I found the show to be a lot more than that. It's like a lot of girl power. You're tackling some pretty heavy issues, but in a very fun way. How did you come up with the formula for your show?
Well, you know, it's funny. I just I feel like that this experience has come up a lot lately, but I guess that's just a mark of a good show. But I recently went up to San Francisco just for one night to see the author George Saunders in conversation, actually with my sweetie, who is a huge fan. And I wasn't as familiar with, I like knew of the legend of George Saunders, but I haven't read much of his stuff. But we went up there because it was, you know, it was something that I knew was really important to my partner. And it was such an extraordinary experience. He's just so brilliant and so compassionate and funny and warm. And But he wrote this book that has kind of either been, met with like huge acclaim or kind of been panned, depending on who the person is. But it's called Lincoln in the Bardo. Mm-hmm. And it's just this long book about Abraham Lincoln being in a cemetery and kind of encountering all these ghosts as he's going to visit the grave of his dead son. But it's this really high concept thing. And he was talking about how the further away he gets from the writing of it, the more nebulous his own understanding of its creation has become. And so instead of like having a great answer for how it all came to be, he feels like kind of embarrassed because he has that more organic hippy dippy answer, which is you start to feel like something just passed through you. And I in no way have any right to compare myself to a genius like George Saunders, but I do feel like the further away from the inception of my podcast I get, the more I don't remember like any kind of situation where it was like, I'm not like sitting with a pad and a pencil, like, what should I do? What should I do? Like, it feels more like it just kind of happened. And I know that can't be true, but for some reason it just feels like, oh, well, it just kind of revealed itself to me. Like, it felt like, I wanted to do a podcast. I didn't know what it should be about. I don't ever remember deciding that it should be covering teenage years, but I do remember separately having these feelings and sensations about living in Los Angeles and feeling like, God, I'm so vulnerable. Like, I feel so raw as a person in a way that I haven't felt since I was a teenager, that I feel very close to that part of myself. So everything kind of whooshed together. And, having this vague awareness of like, well, I don't feel like there aren't, at the time, there weren't as many women in podcasting, and there definitely were fewer women guests and like women topics, particularly in the comedy world. It felt like it was either sort of, news and science and emotion and NPR, and that was very female oriented. And then in comedy, it was like guys. And so all of those things sort of came together, but it's more murky than this kind of like aha moment of like, oh, I've been toiling away on what to do for my podcast. You know what I mean? So I guess it feels like it feels meant to be, in the sense that it felt very easy in ways that a lot of the stuff I've done has not felt easy and has felt more like blood, sweat, and tears. Like it just kind of organically happened. Yeah, exactly.
But I feel like that's how things happen sometimes. Like with this show, in particular, Elizabeth and I have radio backgrounds, so we've done a ton of meet and greets with fans and artists and things like that. So the reason this podcast came about is, well, we're not working in radio anymore and we miss it. But besides that, it's seeing that encounter with the fan, with the celebrity. You always get the story, oh, you'll never believe the time I met so-and-so. But what was it like for the celebrity? And I thought, man, Elizabeth, we got to do a show about this.
Right.
We have to figure out.
Like, what does that celebrity think when they walk away? Some of them are very memorable. Some of them, of course, are just sign and go. But I think. Right. Yeah. But I think there are those few that stick out. Speaking of sticking out, what kind of awkward situations in your childhood really kind of stick out in your mind?
Well, awkward. I mean, the one of the things that I think scarred me the most, which I am now appreciate, which is always a tricky conversation, because then you start getting into like, well, I don't want kids to be bullied because I hated being bullied, but at the same time, I feel like I am who I am because of that. And so I'm really glad that I'm not a parent, because I don't know how I would handle the whole sort of bullying culture at this point. But I was definitely bullied when I was little. And for me, it took mostly the shape. I was bullied in middle school, as many of us were. But when I was in grade school, I had to ride a bus to school. And this girl on the bus just decided that she, wanted to bully me. And so she got all of the kids on the bus to stick their legs in the aisle. So I was the last stop before going to getting to the school. And so I would get on the bus and there wouldn't be anywhere for me to sit because everyone had put their legs in the aisle. So I couldn't even walk past the front seat. And the bus drivers never did anything. The bus drivers were like, oh, kids. So it was so awful, and it was such a horrible feeling. I mean, like, really, it feels like a cinematic moment. Like, really? Are you serious? Like, isn't that a little over the top? This little, like, blonde-haired girl, like, stepping up into the bus and just seeing, 35 kids who have all agreed to not let you sit down.
Right.
but I hated it. I was so awful that I started pretending that I was sick so I didn't have to go to school because I didn't want to tell anyone what was going on. And eventually I did have to tell my parents because they took me to the doctor, and the doctor was like, she is not sick at all. Something's going on.
She is perfectly fine.
And so, so I did end up telling my parents. My parents, it's a kind of a long story because I went to a magnet school, which meant that there was in Tucson, Arizona, which is a very wide, like spanning city. It's large and sort of, not that populous, but it's very big and expansive. And so you would take two buses. You would take the bus, there would be a school bus that would pick up all the kids in, a certain area and then take you to a different school where you would transfer and you would get onto the bus that takes you to your particular school. So this girl didn't go to my school. She went to a different school. So they called my principal, and my principal called her principal, and then I think she got suspended, and then she had to apologize to me, which also was kind of all a nightmare. There's no great way for that to get handled. So that's kind of one of the that's definitely a thing that stands out to me that I know really shaped. I think it really helped me be more empathetic to other people. It's hard to say. Was I already a nice kid? Sure, but I don't know. If I was 7 years old when this happened, it could be said that maybe I wouldn't be as empathetic and sensitive to other people's feelings had I not gone through something like that myself.
See, that's insight that you're gaining, looking back on all this, which is what your show does very, very well. So do you have any tips to help us get, Elizabeth and I are both parents. We have young ones ranging from 5 to 12. So there we go. We're not married, but we have separate family lives.
Elizabeth, I liked that I could hear in your voice that you're shocked that you have a 12-year-old.
I am. He just turned.
How did that happen?
Right. He just turned 12 2 weeks ago, and I just kept saying, I don't think you should do this. And he kept looking at me what? I said, I think let's just stay 11. And then maybe when you think you want to be a teenager next year, we could talk about being 12. And he was like, I don't think that's how this works, Mom. I think I have to go ahead and be 12. And I was like, no, I think I get to be in charge here. And I say 11. And so it's been 2 weeks. And every once in a while I'll say, so how's 11 going? He'll be like, Mom, I am 12. I'm like, yeah, still no.
I get it. That's the only thing I can really compare it to is the festival. But I know I could tell when you said 12.
Yeah.
It's the same way I say 17.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait, how did that happen?
But sorry, so go ahead.
Okay, so the question I want to know is, that's okay. We branch off a lot. With all of your guests that have shared their stories, I'm sure you have some insight as far as some tips maybe on how to get our kids through childhood, having those positive memories and self-esteem. What's important that you've learned since doing your podcast?
It's funny because I just had such an interesting episode with Naima Funk, who is a mom, and she had a lot of really, really great thoughts and ideas about kind of being a parent, and I was very inspired by them. I seem to recall her saying that that there's something to be said for not, especially as a sensitive parent, as it's so hard because you love your kids so much, and so much of your heart is just connected to them all the time. And that also means that sometimes you hate your kids, but then you hate yourself for hating your kids, all of that, those complicated feelings that come along with being a parent that I don't have that. I know I don't have that specific situation. Do I love and hate my dogs sometimes? Sure. Is it the same? Not at all. Right. But she said, just to understand from a parent perspective, not to take things so personally, because there's something very relieving about the idea that at this point as human beings, most of our development follows this same cycle. And so that for her, not just that when, her kid is being a brat, for her not to take it that personally, and also for her not to make it that important that her kid is doing that, rather than shaming him or saying why would you do this to me or whatever, that she feels like she's had a lot of success with being okay, I understand. Well, you're 9, so this is just going to happen.
Nice.
And that there's this moment where the kid is like, oh, I guess this isn't, I guess I'm not, just to de-escalate it in that way, to be okay, well, you're going to yell at me right now because you're 9 and that's what 9-year-olds do. I guess when you're ready to not, you know, be a 9-year-old for a second, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, this is sort of like minimizing of that on both sides has really helped her kind of get through those tough times in a way that feels like she has permission to kind of go, oh yeah, this isn't personal. Like, my child is a 9-year-old, so we're just going to get past this.
I feel like you're just talking to me right now because this week, almost next week, she'll be 6. I have twin daughters. She was tying her shoe or something, and I'm like, we're late. We got to go. And she looks at me and she goes, stop talking. You're annoying me. Dude, I lost it. I was like, all right, you're in timeout right now, but you're right. I maybe should have just said, okay, you're going to yell at me. You're 5.
Yeah.
And just went on with it, but I let it personally affect me.
Yeah.
That was hard.
It's hard not to.
I'm terrified of being a parent because I know I'll be just, you know, it's like I take everything so personally anyway. The idea of having that much more of my heart outside of my body, living in another human being. I mean, I can't. That's incredibly intimidating to me. So I think parents are complete heroes.
Well, we're gonna move on from the parenting topic. We're just looking at the clock, going, "Oh my gosh!"
Okay, so I want to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about Korra. So television plays a huge role in most kids' lives these days. And in 2012, you starred in the animated series The Legend of Korra as the voice of Korra. Before the role, you had done a ton of things on camera. We want to know, was it a huge leap to go from being seen and heard to only being a voice? And was it a refreshing change or just kind of scary?
It was really exciting. I mean, it's very, very different. I don't think that it's not really harder. Many people feel that it's easier. It's easier in the sense that, you know, I mean, the cliche everyone says is like, you can go to work in your pajamas.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I think unfortunately I'm too used to being on camera, so I would still like go there like I was auditioning for something rather than just being like, here I am in my sweatpants. For me, it's like I'm going to a job. I'm still gonna like put on, you know, clothes that I'm not ashamed of. But I mean, it was a tremendous experience. It was an amazing experience doing the first season before anything had come out to the public. And then when the show started airing, that was an entirely different, just amazing experience. I love it because, like many actors, I feel like I ended up doing this thing that essentially is just an extension of the kid that I still am. It's just pretending and playing pretend and imagining, and it's so being able to do a voice where you later go back and see a thing or a person that isn't you, doing all of these things that you could never do in your human body is magic. I mean, to me, it's magic. It really is. Like, cartoons are magic to me. For me, watching myself as animation is so fun and so different, and is just, there's nothing stressful about it. It just feels like I don't even know how this is possible, and I love it.
Okay. Now, are you recording by yourself, or are there other people in the room that are recording with you? Are you working off someone, or are you just recording your words?
Almost always working off at least one other cast member. The Nickelodeon is really, and that's not true for many shows, but Nickelodeon shows, they really, really see the value in putting as many people in a room together to act alongside each other, whether or not they're, you know, on camera. That's really important to them, and I think it really shows through in the quality of the shows that they have. And so that was always a treat. They have, you know, outstanding vocal directors. Andrea Romano is a legend in the business. She was our director for all of the episodes of Korra. And then, so she's amazing on her own, but then, you know, when you get your fellow cast members in there, it just, you know, makes a difference. It brings a life to the scripts that I think it would be really hard to do if you were just going in and recording. I mean, I've certainly done it the other way, and I do prefer having the other actors there.
Now, you also spent 7 years hosting Dinner and a Movie on TBS, one of my favorite shows. You had some like celebrity chefs on there with you. Were you making the dishes? I can't recall. Did you do cooking segments alone, or was there always someone there with you?
There was always someone there with me. It was always, pretty much always the three of us, actually, in any given segment, unless we were doing some kind of weird sketch where someone was doing something off to the side, or, we were throwing to someone who was somewhere else if we were doing some kind of weird bit. But Claude Mann and Paul Gilmartin were on the show for the entirety of the show, which I think was 16 years. I was so lucky to get to do it for the 7 that I did. And I did learn a lot about cooking, actually. We had an extraordinary group of chefs and cooks who, we'd have like 6 chefs and cooks who would be helping us get the different phases of the meals that we were making and having the ingredients prepared. And Claude is really the mastermind behind coming up with the recipes and all the kind of clever names that riffed off of the movies that we would be watching. But there was definitely a lot of stuff that crept in for me in the process of just shooting the show and doing some on-camera prep and then doing some on-camera cooking. And I absolutely loved it. It was so fun. It was such a weird, specific kind of show where, I wouldn't have gotten the experience I got there anywhere else. I was, from the process of watching the movie in advance and writing jokes and coming up with like sketch ideas to then using some of those, but also improvising on the spot along with doing this cooking stuff. And, it was a really particular and very special way for me to kind of get my feet wet in working in comedy in LA, because it was a job I got pretty quickly after I moved to Los Angeles. And so it was a real kind of on the job training.
So do you cook at home? Like, are you a good cook?
I do. I don't I'm a good cook. I'm fairly lazy about cooking. I really have to have had a day that isn't particularly stressful or packed to then want to cook afterwards. My sweetie is a really great cook, and so that also does not help things when someone else is making things that you then don't have to make. That I've become very spoiled. But I really do like cooking, and I think there is something the therapeutic aspect of cooking. I absolutely feel like this, and then all the cliches of like being able to taste when someone is passionate about their cooking or when it's coming from a place of love. I mean, I'm a huge Top Chef fan. I buy into all of that of like, I never thought I would like a show where I could watch other people eating and describing things that I couldn't taste.
Right.
But somehow they make it work.
We're all hooked on them. Trust me.
Right?
Yes.
Before we talk about your current show, I just want to touch on another favorite show of mine, because I live this life, except I'm the guy version. So you were on American Housewife with Katie Mixon, who I just love. So I just kind of wanted to know, what was it like for you working with Katie?
What if I was like, she's awful? I wish you wouldn't have asked me that.
I know you would break my heart. That just can't be.
No, I would never. No, I'm in love with her. I really want her to do the podcast. I don't know if she's ever, if it's ever going to happen, but I will never let that dream die. And I know it will not be because she doesn't want to do it. Let's all just say some quiet prayers that it works out. She's a total dream. She's just an absolute dream.
Let's talk about your current show real quick before we have to end for the day. Stand Against Evil. It's one of those shows that Elizabeth won't watch because she doesn't like scary things.
At all.
But it's one that I've started to watch, and actually I'm starting to love it. So can you talk us through a little bit about your experience working on the show?
Sure, yeah. It's, I don't necessarily think of myself as a horror buff either, but it turns out that when people started asking me a lot of horror movie-related questions when I started doing the show, that would be something that would come up in the press a lot. I realized I had like a stable of favorite horror movies. So the weird thing I found out about myself was like, oh, I guess I do like horror movies. But for us, Dana Gould, who's just absolutely brilliant, he's an amazing stand-up comedian, but he also wrote on The Simpsons for many, many years and is responsible for what I consider to be like the best era. Like him and Conan O'Brien are sort of my favorite Simpsons contributors. So the show is really, really way more on the comedy side. I mean, the horror, it's a horror movie trapped in a sitcom. Right. It's definitely about jokes and, sort of just ludicrous situations a la The Simpsons, much more so than, like an Ash versus Evil Dead obviously is the comparison that gets made most, but it's not, they're actually very, very, very different from one another. Ash is a very cool rock and roll kind of a show, and we're definitely like The Simpsons. So for me, it's just been a treat because I get to play this, this very like almost grisly character where I'm, like the Clint Eastwood kind of character of like, I'm trying to stay tough and Dana has compared me to like the female Harrison Ford, which I don't know how I got lucky enough to have that comparison made, but
Cool.
you know, just to be able to play the straight man, but also still be doing a ton of comedy and be running around like an action star, even though I'm absolutely categorically not one, has just been a total hoot. It's such a fun show to work on.
The one thing I wanted to know is when you're reading a script, because you've had some crazy things happen to you, including like, you know, getting barfed on and things like that. So when you're reading these things in the script, are you ever just like, oh man, I'm not looking forward to going to work today? Or is it just another day at the office?
Well, the only one that I was worried about was this episode in our first season that involved a giant spider monster and a web, because the way Dana had originally written it, I was like hanging upside down in a giant spider's web. And I definitely have a fear of spiders that I wish I didn't have. I try really hard to think that they're amazing creatures, but I kind of feel like they're robots who are trying to take over the world. So I've also hung upside down for another show, and I hated it. So I was really kind of scared. And when I showed up to work that day, they had scrapped the whole me hanging upside down idea, and I was just going to be sort of standing and like enmeshed in this sticky web stuff, and I was so happy about that it was as if it was my birthday. I mean, I really was just like, great. So I definitely that's really the only thing that I read and was like, uh-oh.
Well, you know, time has escaped us, and we've really enjoyed having you on the show. Where can we find you on social media if we want to continue to follow you?
Please follow me on Twitter. I'm at Janet Varney. On Instagram, I am the JV Club. I try to get on there. The thing I'm worst at is staying on and responding to stuff because I'm so busy and I really like engaging with people. And so I'll end up, if I go down that hole, I end up online for like 4 hours. But I'm there and I do read all my tweets, that, you know, the responses and stuff like that. So those are two good places to find me. And my website is just janetvarney.com.
And of course, catch the JV Club. I will listen to it on iTunes, but it's available probably anywhere that you're listening to podcasts, even this show. So definitely look that up as well.
I will. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me on. It was a blast.
Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. You too. Bye.
So Janet Varney, man, she's
fun
and just lovable and likable. And like I said in the opening, I feel like we could be best friends.
Yeah, I think you probably could. Yeah. Knowing you.
You know, we were talking about awkward young experiences,
Yes.
and the one that popped in my head as she's talking about her bus incident is one that traumatized me when I was like in 7th and 8th grade.
Oh, what?
So, you know, I was in basketball. And
wait a minute, you're not that tall.
No, I'm not. But you know,
you're all the kind of the same age, same height. Then
in youth sports,
sure.
can participate in things like that because it's encouraged.
Okay.
So, the traumatic thing was every day during practice, one team had to be shirts, one team had to be skins. Now, I wasn't fat, but I was a chubby little kid, you know, so that was a very uncomfortable time for me. And I always hate, it's like, I just wondered, here was the two things that I was reflecting on. Was the coach intentionally making me skins so that I would quit because I wasn't so good at basketball? Or was it just an oversight, like he was like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and that's just where it fell?
I think probably the second, because I think that most people that have those sorts of memories put way too much emphasis on like the premeditation and all those types of things. I mean, I think having coached sports myself, you know, I'm just counting you off. I just want this practice to start and get moving. And of course, now they don't do that anymore. Now there's those little jersey things.
The pennies.
Yeah, the pennies.
We had those too, and you wouldn't use them. I was like, please, I'll just wear the penny. But
yeah, they never made the girls play shirts and skins.
Oh, duh. As a teenage boy, we'd be at every practice then, you know?
Right.
Jeez, Elizabeth.
Hey, it all goes back to finding that perfect bra.
Oh, man. So anyway, you can follow us on social media. We are on Facebook if you search for Fancounters. You can also email us at hello@fancounters.com. And of course, next week we've got another celebrity guest for you, so we want you to stay tuned for that.
Yes, and please don't forget to go on and give us some great reviews and share us on your Facebook pages. And we appreciate all of you listening. Thank you so much.
If this is your first episode or your 27th, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.